All right, back here with Number the Stars. I'm going to read chapters 2 and 3 in this video so you can follow along with me. Chapter 2, Who is the Man Who Rides Past? Tell me a story, Anne-Marie, begged Kirsty as she snuggled beside her sister in the big bed they shared. Tell me a fairy tale. Anne-Marie smiled and wrapped her arms around her little sister in the dark. All Danish children grew up familiar with fairy tales. Hans Christian Andersen, the most famous of the tale tellers, had been Danish himself. Hans Christian Andersen, if you're not familiar, very famous fairy tale writer, wrote The Little Mermaid, amongst lots of other famous stories. Do you want the one about the Little Mermaid? That one had always been Anne-Marie's own favorite. But Kirsty said no. Tell one that starts with a king and a queen, and they have a beautiful daughter. All right, once upon a time, there was a king, Anne-Marie began. And a queen, whispered Kirsty. Don't forget the queen. And a queen. They lived together in a wonderful palace, and was the palace named Amalienborg? Kirsty asked sleepily. Shh, don't keep interrupting or I'll never finish the story. No, it wasn't Amalienborg. It was a pretend palace. Anne-Marie talked on, making up a story of a king and queen and their beautiful daughter, Princess Kirsten. She sprinkled her tale with formal balls, fabulous gold-trimmed gowns, and feasts of pink frosted cupcakes until Kirsty's deep, even breathing told her that her sister was sound asleep. She stopped, waited for a moment, half expecting Kirsty to murmur, "Then what happened?" But Kirsty was still. Anne-Marie's thoughts turned to the real King Christian X and the real palace, Amalienborg, where he lived in the center of Copenhagen. How the people of Denmark loved King Christian. He was not like fairy tale kings, who seemed to stand on balconies giving orders to subjects, or who sat on golden thrones demanding to be entertained and looking for suitable husbands for their daughters. King Christian was a real human being, a man with a serious, kind face. She had seen him often when she was younger. Each morning he had come from the palace on his horse, Jubilee, and ridden alone through the streets of Copenhagen, greeting his people. Sometimes, when Anne-Marie was a little girl, her older sister, Lisa, had taken her to stand on the sidewalk so that she could wave to King Christian. Sometimes he had waved back to the two of them and smiled. Now you are special forever, Lisa had told her once, because you have been greeted by a king. Anne-Marie turned her head on the pillow and stared through the partly opened curtains of the window into the dim September night. Thinking of Lisa, her solemn, lovely sister, always made her sad. So she turned her thoughts again to the king, who was still alive, as Lisa was not. She remembered a story that Papa had told her shortly after the war began, shortly after Denmark had surrendered and the soldiers had moved in overnight to take their places on the corners. One evening, Papa had told her that earlier he was on an errand near his office, standing on the corner waiting to cross the street when King Christian came by on his morning ride. One of the German soldiers had turned suddenly and asked a question of a teenage boy nearby. "Who is that man who rides past here every morning on his horse?" the German soldier had asked. Papa said he had smiled to himself, amused that the German soldier did not know. He listened while the boy answered. "He is our king," the boy told the soldier. "He is the king of Denmark." "Where is his bodyguard?" the soldier had asked. "And do you know what the boy said?" Papa had asked Anne-Marie. She was sitting on his lap. She was little then, only 7 years old. She shook her head, waiting to hear the answer. The boy looked right at the soldier, and he said, "All of Denmark is his bodyguard." Anne-Marie had shivered. It sounded like a very brave answer. "Is it true, Papa?" she asked. "What the boy said?" Papa thought for a moment. He always considered questions very carefully before he answered them. "Yes," he said at last, "it is true. Any Danish citizen would die for King Christian to protect him." "You too, Papa?" "Yes. And Mama?" "Mama too." Anne-Marie shivered again. "Then I would too, Papa, if I had to." They sat silently for a moment. From across the room, Mama watched them, Anne-Marie and Papa, and she smiled. Mama had been crocheting that evening 3 years ago, the lacy edging of a pillowcase, part of Lisa's trousseau. A trousseau is like a trunk that's kept for a girl before she's gonna be married. Her fingers moved rapidly, turning the thin white thread into an intricate, narrow border. Lisa was a grown-up girl of 18 then, about to be married to Peter Nielsen. When Lisa and Peter married, Mama said, Anne-Marie and Kirsty would have a brother for the very first time. "Papa," Anne-Marie had said finally into the silence, "sometimes I wonder why the king wasn't able to protect us." Why didn't he fight the Nazis so that they wouldn't come into Denmark with their guns? Papa sighed. We are such a tiny country, he said, and they are such an enormous enemy. Our king was wise. He knew how few soldiers Denmark had. He knew that many, many Danish people would die if we fought. In Norway they fought, Anne-Marie pointed out. Papa nodded. They fought very fiercely in Norway. They had those huge mountains for the Norwegian soldiers to hide in. Even so, Norway was crushed. In her mind, Anne-Marie had pictured Norway as she remembered it from the map at school, up above Denmark. Norway was pink on the school map. She imagined the pink strip of Norway crushed by a fist. Are there German soldiers in Norway now, the same as here? Yes, Papa said. In Holland, too, Mama added from across the room, and Belgium and France. But not in Sweden, Anne-Marie announced, proud that she knew so much about the world. Sweden was blue on the map, and she had seen Sweden, even though she had never been there. Standing behind Uncle Henrik's house, north of Copenhagen, she had looked across the water, the part of the North Sea that was called the Kattegat, to the land on the other side. That is Sweden you are seeing, Uncle Henrik had told her. You are looking across to another country. That's true, Papa had said. Sweden is still free. And now, 3 years later, it was still true, but much else had changed. King Christian was getting old, and he had been badly injured last year in a fall from his horse, faithful old Jubilee, who had carried him around Copenhagen so many mornings. For days they thought he would die, and all of Denmark had mourned. But he hadn't. King Christian X was still alive. It was Lisa who was not. It was her tall, beautiful sister who had died in an accident 2 weeks before her wedding. In the blue carved trunk in the corner of this bedroom, Anne-Marie could see its shape even in the dark, were folded Lisa's pillowcases with their crocheted edges, her wedding dress with its hand-embroidered neckline, unworn, and the yellow dress that she had worn and danced in, with its full skirt flying, at the party celebrating her engagement to Peter. Mama and Papa never spoke of Lisa. They never opened the trunk. But Anne-Marie did, from time to time, when she was alone in the apartment. Alone, she touched Lisa's things gently, remembering her quiet, soft-spoken sister who had looked forward so to marriage and children of her own. Red-headed Peter, his sister's fiancé, had not married anyone in the years since Lisa's death. He had changed a great deal. Once he had been like a fun-loving older brother to Anne-Marie and Kirsty, teasing and tickling, always a source of foolishness and pranks. Now he still stopped by the apartment often, and his greetings to the girls were warm and smiling, but he was usually in a hurry, talking quickly to Mama and Papa about things Anne-Marie didn't understand. He no longer sang the nonsense songs that had once made Anne-Marie and Kirsty shriek with laughter, and he never lingered anymore. Papa had changed too. He seemed much older and very tired, defeated. The whole world had changed. Only the fairy tales remained the same. And they lived happily ever after, Anne-Marie recited, whispering into the dark, completing the tale for her sister, who slept beside her, one thumb in her mouth. So, chapter 2, I don't want you to get confused there. Notice at the beginning, she's putting Kirsty to bed with a story, and then the chapter ends with her concluding that story. And while she's telling the story to Kirsty, she's reminiscing back on memories of what it was like in Denmark before the Germans came, talking to her father about why Denmark didn't fight the Nazis. They surrendered very quickly, and it was because they knew that they wouldn't be able to defeat them. And they mentioned countries all around them that are also occupied by the Nazis. The one country near them that is not occupied is Sweden. Sweden remained neutral during the war. And we also learn the sad information that her sister, her older sister Lisa, died 2 weeks before her wedding in an accident. All right, I'm going to lean back a little bit so I'm a little more comfortable, and we're going to read chapter 3. Chapter 3, Where is Mrs. Hirsch? The days of September passed, one after the other, much the same. Anne-Marie and Ellen walked to school together and home again, always now taking the longer way, avoiding the tall soldier and his partner. Kirsty dawdled just behind them or scampered ahead, never out of their sight. The two mothers still had their coffee together in the afternoons. They began to knit mittens as the days grew slightly shorter and the first leaves began to fall from the trees, because another winter was coming. Everyone remembered the last one. There was no fuel now for the homes and apartments in Copenhagen, and the winter nights were terribly cold. So they didn't have anything to heat their apartments in the winter. Like the other families in their building, the Johansons had opened the old chimney and installed a little stove to use for heat when they could find coal to burn. Mama used it too sometimes for cooking because electricity was rationed now. Rationed means that you only get a certain amount per week or per month or whatever it is to use. At night, they used candles for light. Sometimes Ellen's father, a teacher, complained in frustration because he couldn't see in the dim light to correct his students' papers. Soon we will have to add another blanket to your bed, Mama said one morning as she and Anne-Marie tidied the bedroom. Kirsty and I are lucky to have each other for warmth in the winter, Anne-Marie said. Poor Ellen, to have no sisters. She will have to snuggle in with her Mama and Papa when it gets cold, Mama said, smiling. I remember when Kirsty slept between you and Papa. She was supposed to stay in her crib, but in the middle of the night she would climb out and get in with you, Anne-Marie said, smoothing the pillows on the bed. Then she hesitated and glanced at her mother, fearful that she had said the wrong thing, the thing that would bring the pained look to her mother's face. The days when little Kirsty slept in Mama and Papa's room were the days when Lisa and Anne-Marie shared this bed. But Mama was laughing quietly. I remember too, she said. Sometimes she wet the bed in the middle of the night. I did not, Kirsty said haughtily from the bedroom doorway. I never, ever did that. Mama, still laughing, knelt and kissed Kirsty on the cheek. Time to leave for school, girls, she said. She began to button Kirsty's jacket. Oh dear, she said suddenly. Look, the button has broken right in half. Anne-Marie, take Kirsty with you after school to the little shop where Mrs. Hirsch sells threads and buttons. See if you can buy just one to match the others on her jacket. I'll give you some kroner. That's money in Denmark. It shouldn't cost very much. But after school, when the girls stopped at the shop, which had been there as long as Anne-Marie could remember, they found it closed. There was a new padlock on the door and a sign, but the sign was in German. They couldn't read the words. I wonder if Mrs. Hirsch is sick, Anne-Marie said as they walked away. I saw her Saturday, Ellen said. She was with her husband and their son. They all looked just fine, or at least the parents looked just fine. The son always looks like a horror, she giggled. Anne-Marie made a face. The Hirsch family lived in the neighborhood, so they had seen the boy Samuel often. He was a tall teenager with thick glasses, stooped shoulders, and unruly hair. He rode a bicycle to school, leaning forward and squinting, wrinkling his nose to nudge his glasses into place. His bicycle had wooden wheels, now that rubber tires weren't available, and it creaked and clattered in the street. I think the Hirsches all went on a vacation to the seashore, Kirsty announced. And I suppose they took a big basket of pink frosted cupcakes with them, Anne-Marie said sarcastically to her sister. Yes, I suppose they did, Kirsty replied. Anne-Marie and Ellen exchanged looks that meant, Kirsty is so dumb. No one in Copenhagen had taken a vacation at the seashore since the war began. There were no pink frosted cupcakes. There hadn't been for months. Anne-Marie thought, looking back at the shop before they turned the corner, where was Mrs. Hirsch? The Hirsch family had gone somewhere. Why else would they close the shop? Mama was troubled when she heard the news. Are you sure? She asked several times. We can find another button someplace, Anne-Marie reassured her. Or we can take one from the bottom of the jacket and move it up. It won't show very much. But it didn't seem to be the jacket that worried Mama. Are you sure the sign was in German? She asked. Maybe you didn't look carefully. Mama, it had a swastika on it. If you don't know what a swastika is, I should have prepared one for a picture for you. Look at it and Google if you can. A swastika was on the Nazi flag, the Nazi symbol. It's a black, it kind of almost looks like an X with like curved sides. I'm sure you've seen a swastika before, you just might not know what it was called, but it was the symbol of the Nazi party. Her mother turned away with a distracted look. Anne-Marie, watch your sister for a few moments and begin to peel the potatoes for dinner. I'll be right back. Where are you going? Anne-Marie asked as her mother started for the door. I want to talk to Mrs. Rosen. Puzzled, Anne-Marie watched her mother leave the apartment. She went to the kitchen and opened the door to the cupboard where the potatoes were kept. Every night now, it seemed, they had potatoes for dinner, and very little else. Anne-Marie was almost asleep when there was a light knock on the bedroom door. Candlelight appeared as the door opened, and her mother stepped in. Are you asleep, Anne-Marie? No? Why? Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, but I'd like you to get up and come out to the living room. Peter's here. Papa and I want to talk to you. Anne-Marie jumped out of bed, and Kirsty grunted in her sleep. Peter, she hadn't seen him in a long time. There was something frightening about his being here at night. Copenhagen had a curfew, and no citizens were allowed out after 8 o'clock. It was very dangerous, she knew, for Peter to visit at this time, but she was delighted that he was here. Though his visits were always hurried, they almost seemed secret somehow, in a way she couldn't quite put her finger on. Still, it was a treat to see Peter. It brought back memories of happier times, and her parents loved Peter too. They said he was like a son. Barefoot, she ran to the living room and into Peter's arms. He grinned, kissed her cheek, and ruffled her long hair. "You've grown taller since I saw you last," he told her. "You're all legs." Anne-Marie laughed. "I won the girls' foot race last Friday at school," she told him proudly. "Where have you been? We've missed you." "My work takes me all over," Peter explained. "Look, I brought you something. One for Kirsty, too." He reached into his pocket and handed her 2 seashells. Anne-Marie put the smaller one on the table to save it for her sister. She held the other in her hands, turning it in the light, looking at the ridged, pearly surface. It was so like Peter to bring just the right gift. "For your mama and papa, I brought something more practical."
Calvary staff.
2 bottles of
If you've
beer.
ordered a pizza, if you don't come get it, I'm going to eat it. It's in the main office. If you've ordered a pizza from Lenny's. Other than that, all staff, if you could report to the lunchroom at this time to help with dissemination of information, it'd be greatly appreciated. Feel free to wear gloves or whatever else you need. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to finish this page and then I will have to make a second video. "For your mama and papa, I brought something more practical. 2 bottles of beer." Mama and Papa smiled and raised their glasses. Papa took a sip and wiped the foam from his upper lip. Then his face became more serious. "Anne-Marie," he said, "Peter tells us that the Germans have issued orders closing many stores run by Jews." And I will continue in another video later.